Hey everyone. I want to cover Bergson's Introduction to Metaphysics, as well as your first exam. And yeah, Henri Bergson, spelled like Henry, Henri, um, was a French philosopher from the 20th century, um, known for intuitionism and using metaphors, um, and prioritizing feeling and intuition. I may have said intuition twice. Let's pull up some materials because I'm looking at them, but you're not. Great. Oh, actually, sorry. Okay, that should be fixed now. Um, cool. So 1903 was an Introduction to Metaphysics was published. This might be a little small for you guys. Um, and my copy is in a book called The Creative Mind. Um, and that's where all the annotations come from. Um, Whataburger. I live in Texas. I grew up in Texas. I'm a native Texan. Um, Jalapeno with cheese, mayonnaise, no mustard. Anyway, this book was published much later, not 1903. It was like 19, it's right there, 1946. Uh, yes, originally published 1946. That kind of information you can find on like the inside front cover of the title page. So this one, for example, says it may be backwards, but this right here. This Dover publication, and I'll read it to you from there. Uh, this Dover edition, first published in 2007, is a reset, unabridged republication of the work published by the Philosophical Library, New York, in 1946. So, um, technically, the overall book is not out of the 100-year like free use period, but the essay itself is. Um, and I think the translation is too. But you know, uh, it's for educational purposes. And full stop, I would still teach material that was less than 100 years old. Anyway, let's look at some stuff. So as I told you before, the class is structured such that you have guiding questions and an exam. Um, and if the class is in person, then you would take the exam in a blue book. And if it is if it's online, I've been thinking about this. And I'm going to use Respondus Lockdown Browser, and you'll type the exam within a window within the same 45-minute window that the um, in-person students have. That 45-minute window is tight. You'll need to really understand the material in order to explain it all in that window. Um, and so I want to go over the structure ahead of time with you too. You won't get the prompt for all of the exams, like I told you before with the guiding questions. Um, the Bergson has the direct prompt and the American Pragmatism has direct prompt, but the other two exams, the ancient slash modern and the uh, continental philosophy exam, those two do not have direct prompts offered to you. You have to just study the guiding questions and build up an understanding of the text. Um, and from there, be prepared to come in, see the prompts, choose one, kind of organize your thoughts quickly, and then start explaining it. Um, And that may seem like a high standard, but it's very doable if you understand the text. So my response to something like AI usage in recent times is literally just the material's tough and you have to be able to do it. You have to understand it really well. Um, Cool. But you do, when you're getting the hang of things with Bergson, you do get that prompt. Um, and I'm not gonna answer these in the video necessarily. Um, I will give like a B level answer in the video. And then once we read the text, you should combine like that B level answer just primes you, right? It just introduces you to the text. Um, and then you can access the text in more detail to construct the A level answer. The B is a sketch, the A is very detailed and um I'm thinking certain, thorough, sophisticated, confident. Yeah, right. So that requires level of familiarity, especially doing 45 minutes. That you would need to read the text two or three times probably. Um, and so I'm not afraid to say it multiple times, but we need to get to that level of sophistication and it's going to take like kind of like multi ratcheting up, right? Um, just thinking pedagogically here and trying to communicate that to you. Maybe some of you have experiences of like being taught something in elementary math and then finding out later it doesn't actually work the way you thought it worked, or taught something in elementary science or earth science or planetary science, biological science. A basic, okay, the atoms, for example, they don't work like we necessarily were taught with a clean model. We're still figuring out exactly how they work and what their particles do. We mostly know it. I mean, but like, I'm pretty sure we've moved away from the rings and we have clouds, and the clouds still have like the electron, right? First off, all human knowledge has been developed through philosophy, investigation, and other forms of refinement, discourse. Um, so it's all an imperfect process that's being mod it's modular, it's being iterated and improved. Um, So I was going to say, like, if you've had experiences where you're like, man, I was taught one thing and now it's something different completely. Well, that's because you wouldn't be able to access this up here. Well, one, as a young child, but even as an adult, if you were never working through those rougher concepts, you would never get to the more sophisticated. You wouldn't be able to access it. And if you could, you might not be able to connect it to other things. So it really just does take a lot of work to do philosophy. Um, and it's different than other disciplines and discourses. In history, for example, like for history, right? You might read hundreds of pages, you might skim them. In philosophy, you might have to reread sentences and really think about it for a few days and talk to your friends about it and say, I'm not sure if I buy this argument. You ran through that really quickly and expect me to think it through and figure out the details in my own life and for myself and what's best. Because that's what philosophy does. It teaches you to work that out for yourself. And the goal of that is to be a better person and to refine your character in you, not to solve some problem for everybody, because it has to be done for each person. Cool. Um, so I'm gonna keep this to around like 40 minutes. I'm sure you can see that from the link to the video itself. But right now I think we're at about 10. Um, so I'm gonna read these. Well, hmm. You can pull up these materials yourself with me, and we're just gonna work through them. Bergson is a French philosopher known for intuitionism and was widely popular. So, unlike most philosophers, he actually was just super famous. He drew a big crowd. This is an article that's linked in the guiding questions. And These people are crowded outside trying to see his seminar, like his lecture. Like he's teaching a class and they all want to take the class. Um, so I might tell you some more of the stuff from that article in a minute, but biographical information, um, yeah. Don't rely on there's on the summarizations of his work in here, but there's some good stuff. That's a good introduction into his work, like I was saying, right? That multiple levels of getting the information. Um, 700 people would attempt to squeeze into a room designed for 375. Talks delivered in 1911. So 8 years after Introduction to Metaphysics, 8 years after what we're reading, caused the traffic jam, the first ever traffic jam on Broadway in New York. I took my master's classes in New York City, so I'm very fond of New York. Time is not space. Um, yeah, yeah, that's right. So the static points are analysis. The conception of time as discrete entities. And really, this is transcendence too. Transcendental identities that are separate and have to then be kind of cross over. And you can never cross over and reconstitute the whole from the pieces. You have to start with the whole. So you start with the immanence and you start with the flow itself, the process itself, time itself, intuition itself, my intuition of my life, my memory of going through my life, your memory of going through your life. Um, okay. Reality is mobility. This is in the introduction to metaphysics that we'll read. To exist is to change. To change is to mature is to go on creating oneself endlessly. I have a handful of other texts. That's from Creative Evolution. Um, I haven't read these. So first I have, well, not first, but I have Bergsonism by Deleuze. Um, haven't read it yet, but it was part of a class I took, and honestly, I didn't read it as well as I should have. I didn't read most. It's a lot of readings to keep up with. Um, Creative Evolution, Two Sources of Morality and Religion, and Matter and Memory. So in Creative Evolution, he's kind of trying to, well, I actually don't know. I don't want to speak too much to things I don't know. Generally, Bergson thought of life, he had this idea of elan vital, so he thought of life as being a connected, vital principle or vital force, uh, either necessitating, tending towards, or seeking out survival. Kind of pragmatic in that regard, Deweyan pragmatism. But matter and memory connects conscious perception and reality. Um, yeah, I don't know his other works very well, but I do know his methodology really, really well. I know Introduction to Metaphysics really well. The reason I haven't read his other stuff is because I've had to reread the stuff I teach so much to make sure I understand it. Um, like I said, philosophy requires a lot of revisiting the same stuff. Plato famously ends some of his dialogues by saying, "We got to start over. We don't have a good answer. We couldn't figure it out. Let's try again." And the person's like, "I don't have time. I gotta go. Peace, Socrates." Um, okay. So yeah, this article is really cool. Um, it kind of, in a way, speaks to why I put this text at the beginning of our class. In Introduction to Metaphysics, Bergson, so you should read this. I'm not going to read it. We don't have time for that, but you should read it. Um, in Introduction to Metaphysics, Bergson initially makes a distinction between two ways of knowing a thing, right here. Um, and he, sorry, I was thinking about something else. The distinction is between absolute knowledge and relative knowledge, between intuition and analysis. And he says that all philosophers have done this. We'll just read it because I don't memorize details. I get the gist of the argument, which is all I expect. Well, that's all I expect from you, but I expect a sophisticated presentation of the argument in your essay. Um, and going back and forth is a sophisticated presentation of the argument, right? Like that indicates nuance in your understanding. Reticence in presenting a concrete position shows that you respect the complex multiplicities and polyvalences. Um, I understand that I can't translate the whole of Bergson for you, right? But we can accomplish a lot with these lectures. Um, he makes the distinction between two ways of knowing a thing. He says that the relative will only just ever circle around something, but the absolute goes into it directly. So intuition will go into the truth of things, and it gets like God or the absolute. Um, he then points us to an experience of intuition that everybody can and should and always will be able to access, which is what he calls the intuition of concrete duration. Everything has the intuition of concrete duration, but primarily, first and foremost, the intuition of concrete duration is the intuition of my concrete duration. Always mine, yours. When you say that sentence, it is mine for you. Mine each time for each one is a phrase I like. Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am each time for each one. It's not independent. Okay. Um, so my intuition of concrete duration. And that's something you can experience in its unity and in its multiplicity. He talks about rationalism and empiricism too, and he associates unity with rationalism and multiplicity with empiricism. There's also some broader tradition, some broader associations in this tradition of the history of philosophy, within the history of philosophy, or in this hermeneutical tradition of interpreting the history of philosophy. Let's put it that way. Um, there is some association between empiricism and pluralism. And Bergson says he's pursuing a true empiricism, but he also says that metaphysics is the dialectical movement back and forth. That's why dialectic is a back and forth. Um, the dialectical movement back and forth between rationalism and empiricism from one extreme to the other, because each extreme misses something about the weave, the actual way that they're put together, I guess. Um, yeah. So let's try to get down to in this video, let's try to get down to this break where he starts to introduce um the intuition of concrete duration. That's on page 136 in my copy. So if you have a blank copy to annotate, I may have given it may have different pagination. but you should follow along with this one too, because it's the one I have. So, we got 20 minutes left. All right. Towards the end of the essay, he talks a lot about uh, he has some really great examples in the sketch of the Tower of Notre Dame, the color orange on a spectrum, psychological studies, the ego, self. That helps with elements versus parts. I have some description of the sketch of the Tower of Notre Dame that helps with elements versus parts. Um, and the ball moving through the air to show that motion comes before a stopping point or a place, a position. Motion is before position. Um, and to show that mobility comes before stasis, that indeterminacy becomes before determination. And so that's important to immanence as well, right? Because the indeterminacy of an immanence of multiple worlds that are then collapsed into a determination of what was actualized and what came to fruition, as opposed to a set of transcendentals um, that have to be explained how they come together, which is much harder to do. So is it a soup that differentiates, or is it a separate bunch of separate things? And how do you add on something that isn't just another step? When you add something, it seems like it should be a step. That's something Bergson will say, something like Sartre might say. Um, the facts for Sartre, the facts of psychology can never daisy chain onto each other to explain the totality. For Bergson, the different static positions, the analyses can never daisy chain to explain the totality. This is in Dewey as well, recognition versus perception. In recognition, you reduce one thing to what you already know, to some category you already know. But in perception, that category comes to the fore and you stick with the new thing in the present moment. Um, and it becomes more rich from the category as opposed to being flattened by the category, by being put into it. Um, in a way, though, you should also enrich the category, right? I can make intuitionism and intuition much richer through Dewey, and I can make Dewey much richer through and all these other thinkers that I have. And that's what intertextuality is for someone like Julia Kristeva, um, where each text informs your reading of other texts. And so hermeneutics is always an affective, overlapping historical process. And eventually you'll realize that's what consciousness is too, which is why immanence makes sense, makes much more sense than something like transcendence. And, maybe that's my collection of examples for Bergson's point here. Um, Elements versus parts. For example, parts are discrete things, but elements express the whole. So an element kind of tapers out and dissipates into everything else. That's how I think of it. It is everything, but it's everything presented in a certain perspective or under a certain emphasis. Um, so for example, like this face of the cup is an element of the cup. You're not just getting a part of the cup, you're getting the whole cup because you're getting it from this emphasis, this significance, this portrayal. Same with this, you're still getting the whole cup, but you're getting a different emphasis, a different significance, a different portrayal. Um, I like this cup. I like all of my cups. I like all my things. I'm a very sentimental person. I'd keep things for reasons and throw most things away. Okay. Um, Bergson thinks like reality is that way too. You know, the ball at a certain position is not a part of the motion of the ball flying through the air. It is an element of the ball's path expressing the totality of the motion. Um, my actions right now, affectively speaking, to go through Spinoza and Walter Benjamin and even a little bit of Marx when it comes to historical materialism. Um, the idea that matter, and in physics, we call these world lines. An object has a trajectory that it's charted across the world. Um, this is still relevant to intuition and analysis. Analysis wants to separate and fragment these things. And capitalism benefits by allowing us or causing us to forget the production process of things we consume or purchase. It's called commodity fetishism. It dehistoricizes our commodities. Um, and we forget that there was suffering involved in their production. Or capitalism as a system continues to profit because it doesn't face the consequences of that uh, suffering in the production process. But it's analysis instead of intuition. It doesn't take the whole, it doesn't get to the whole. Um, and that's related to affect. That's related to historical materialism, to the idea, right? Like this cup actually came from Canada. I went on a trip with family members there and got it. Um, this journal that I've written in over 2 or 3 years has had different environments inscribed. I come to it from different places and different moments of my life. And each, like this half page, I'm not going to show you what's on there. The top of this half page is from 2023, and I found some space on the bottom half to come back in and fill it with something else. Um, there are complex labor lines weaving the world together. That is what historical materialism means. So, I know I wanted to mention Spinoza, elements and parts. So, in Spinoza, Bergson does come out of Spinoza, and Deleuze does too. And most people will say that disagrees with Marx about the modes of production and some of the stuff that I'm not quite clear on. And ultimately, my priorities are around domination, oppression, freedom, self-determination, um, for everyone. Okay. Spinoza, individuals are elements of nature, of reality. We all express different positions in a shared fabric of reality. I saw this great video recently that was like, here's the blanket of everything. Here's all physics. And the guy was like, what's outside the blanket? And the other guy was like, more blanket. I don't want to get too close on the copyright on the script, but it's just blanket. Like this is everything in reality. And this is me, and this is you, and this is Winchester, and this is your parents, and this is my parents. And they're all different parts on the blanket. Winchester's playing with his squeak toy in there. And I think he can hear me calling him. And now he's going to bring it in here. But we're all the blanket. Um, that's also the intuition of concrete duration, right? Uh, that's actually pretty much it. So how does Bergson argue that the intuition of concrete duration proves that I'm connected to everyone else and everything else in existence? Well, that's the big answer. It's one of the ways of conceiving of the big answer. Um, the importance of this is that we owe things to each other, that um, we can't stand for certain injustices happening to anyone. Um, not just because they didn't happen to me, but because they didn't happen to this body, but they happened to me, you know? The I-we relation is slippy. We do need to get into the text. You'll work at these parts of the question out. Um, you need to talk about the text and the personal examples. I want your personal examples to be specific. If you're using AI to answer these somehow, then your personal examples will be too similar to other personal examples. So don't make that mistake. Um, I don't want to have to look for that. I don't want to have to catch it. I don't want to have to call it out. I don't want to have to give it a zero. And the easiest way for me to get ahead of all that is to be direct with you and say, don't do it. When it comes to writing the essay, use your own words. Understand the material, spend some time working through it. Follow the structure I give you. Use separate paragraphs. Use examples. It's not that hard. I'm not looking for fancy language. I'm looking for really any red flags that you misunderstand it. Um, and there are these different, sorry, I have dual monitors. There are these different points that you're going to need to hit in order to get full credit as well. Um, okay. And this is the fun part. If we compare the various ways of defining metaphysics and of conceiving the absolute, we shall find, despite apparent discrepancies, that philosophers agree in making a deep distinction between two ways of knowing a thing. The first implies going all around it, the second entering into it. The first depends on the viewpoint chosen and the symbols employed, while the second is taken from no viewpoint and rests on no symbol. For the first kind of knowledge, we shall say that it stops at the relative. Of the second, that wherever possible, it attains the absolute. So the first kind, going all around it, just kind of modeling some text processing that you should do in your own. Uh, the first depends on the viewpoint chosen and the symbols employed, right? So he says down here further that it's translated because it's in symbols, it's translated. So words are symbols, math is symbols. Um, really, any kind of expression is a symbol. Translation then is not just something that happens across languages for Bergson. It's how you might say the same idea in different philosophers with different labels, or how you might say the same idea or approach the same phenomena, the same grounded middle point of experience and reality, um, from different perspectives, from physics, from biology. The body, for example, the human body might be taken is taken very differently between psychology, biology, something like anatomy and physiology, doctors, like medical doctors. Um, and then some philosophers will say that there are other regimes of conception. So even beyond these discourses, there are other discourses of ways of modalizing, meaning ways of perceiving the world and its possibilities, modalizing. So the modes that you give to things. Modes are ways or manners of being. Um, right? So like non-scientific, like fascism, for example, would have another way of looking at the body that is appropriative, dehumanizing, colonizing. Um, it has to do with the way that that mind is interpreting and continues to interpret and spends their time interpreting that reality or that object of study. So this is very Foucaultian, um, in terms of like regimes of knowledge and concerns about biopower. Mm, so if somebody's interested in this kind of, hopefully for the right reasons of preventing atrocities, um, and then critiquing them, I would suggest Foucault. I like Foucault's discourse on language, personally. Um, anyway, done a lot on translation too. So then reality becomes a language. Gestures are a language. The way that objects exist in relation to each other is communicating something to us and sets up a stage of context and sense and meaning that is communicative and therefore is linguistic. So historical materialism is also hermeneutical materialism. Anyway, getting low on time, I need to hurry and avoid distractions. So the second, it enters into the truth of the thing. It's taken from no viewpoint, rests on no symbol. It's not translated. It's not from biology instead of psychology. We don't really know what this is yet. What could this magical, great, wonderful, powerful thing be? Um, so the other kind that circles around goes all around it and depends on symbols and other kind of mediating factors, translators, is relative knowledge and something that gets to the heart of things like the cogito ergo sum or like the intuition of your own intuition of life, is absolute knowledge. You might call it circular, but it's not. It grounds everything else. Um, take, for example, the movement of an object in space. I perceive it differently according to the point of view from which I look at it, whether from that of mobility or of immobility. I express it differently, furthermore, as I relate it to the system of axes or reference points, that is to say, according to the symbols by which I translate it, as I was saying, translation. And I call it relative for this double reason. In either case, I place myself outside the object itself. When I speak of an absolute movement, not an absolute entity or static thing, but an absolute movement. It means that I attribute to the mobile an inner being and, as it were, states of soul. It also means that I am in harmony with these states and enter into them by an effort of imagination. So he uses the word effort, but he puts that with imagination. Um, he calls it a sympathetic dilation of the mind, an effort of imagination, a sympathetic dilation of the mind, where sympathy is closer to how we use empathy. Um, Meaning sympathy tries to replicate or mirror, and empathy actually enters into the experience with the other person. It depends on it. I feel what you feel. In sympathy, I try to imagine how I would feel if I were you, or if I went through what you go through. In a way, he's advocating for both because he says an act of imagination, an effort of imagination, but intuition itself is felt. I may have to practice it with this effort, but when I know something, I'm not making the effort. There's a commitment to the knowing. I'm accessing the absolute. I am in harmony with states of the soul. In a way, the imagination is aesthetic. The effort of imagination is my seeing if it fits, if it makes good sense. And so it's abductive reasoning tested through aesthetic imagination and put into play to make sure that I am keeping my subsystems of coherence coherent. Okay. Therefore, according to whether the object is mobile or immobile, whether it adopts one movement or another, I shall not have the same feeling about it. And what I feel will depend neither on the point of view I adopt toward the object, since I am in the object itself, nor on the symbols by which I translate it, since I have renounced all translation in order to possess the original. In short, the movement will not be grasped from without, and as it were, from where I am, but from within, inside it, in what it is in itself. And I love this line. I shall have hold of an absolute. It's so triumphant. Um, that's our time. I'm gonna go have breakfast with my family. Um, and we'll tackle the rest of this later this afternoon. And you do that whenever you want to. We'll try to keep them to 40 to 45-minute chunks so that so in the rest of this little chunk, he talks about the hero of a novel. He says that if you were the hero, it's different than reading all the different actions the hero takes. Being the hero is just the fluidity of it. In a way, to raise my arm is a simple task. I just intend to raise my arm. So now we're doing phenomenology. I have an intentionality toward raising my arm. From the outside, if you're not me with that intuition and that intention, it looks like a lot of static middle points that you could cut up over and over again. So yeah, his examples are great. His distinctions are great. He really contours. He'll give us examples and then show how they're not good enough and how they need to be refined. Um, I would say jump ahead, but there should be a video, like, because I'm used to like sending off a class, like read ahead. Um, you can, you could keep going and then come back to my video and see what you think of how I've been and what you were confused about. Or you can just go to my next video. Um, I was just explaining like my perspective. I'm imagining a classroom. I'm in habits from a classroom. But yeah, thanks for being here. There's a dog tax. There's a title cards, Winchester. Sorry, let me mute this. So, all right. Come here, bud. Get up here. Hey guys. Oh, yeah. Good boy. That's a good boy. Um, okay. Bye.